3 Secrets to Thriving. After losing your spouse, lessons on grief, independence, and rediscovery. When you've spent years, perhaps decades, building a life with your spouse, the prospect of losing them can feel like the end of your world. Many people who experience the death of a lifelong partner find themselves overwhelmed by grief, isolation, and the fear that life will never feel meaningful again. But what if that loss, though devastating, didn't have to signify the end of joy or purpose? This article follows the experiences of 3 widows, each of whom encountered profound loss, but managed to rebuild their lives in meaningful and fulfilling ways. Their stories will shed light on the most important lessons they've learned along the way, lessons that can help others in similar situations not just survive, but thrive. Chapter 1. The Pain and Beauty of Rediscovery After Loss. Emily's story. When grief overwhelms you. Emily Carson, at 68, never imagined that she'd outlive her husband, Michael. They had been married for 45 years, built a family, traveled, laughed, and shared countless memories. "Michael was my everything," she said softly, her hands trembling slightly as she recalled their time together. "The day he didn't wake up was the day I felt like part of me died too." For months after Michael passed, Emily felt like she was walking through a fog. The grief was an all-consuming weight that she carried with her every day. Simple tasks, like making breakfast or watching TV, were impossible without being reminded of his absence. The house was unbearably quiet. Every creak, every gust of wind reminded her that she was alone. "I couldn't even go into the bedroom without breaking down," Emily said. "I slept on the couch for months because the bed we shared felt like a grave." Her friends tried to be supportive, but they were still coupled up, living lives Emily couldn't relate to anymore. "I felt guilty for pulling away," she admitted, "but being around happy couples made my grief even more painful. I didn't know how to fit in with them anymore." The holidays were especially hard. Their children, both grown, encouraged her to come visit, but it felt hollow without Michael by her side. "We had our traditions," Emily whispered. "Hanging ornaments, baking cookies, singing carols. All of it seemed pointless without him." The turning point. A moment of reflection. The turning point for Emily came almost a year after Michael's death. One evening, while sorting through old photo albums, she found a picture of them on their wedding day. Michael had the biggest smile on his face, the kind that lit up the entire room. As she stared at the image, something inside her shifted. "I realized that Michael wouldn't want me to live like this," Emily said, her voice firm. "He wouldn't want me to be stuck in this sorrow, letting life pass me by. He loved me too much for that." That realization was a breakthrough for Emily. She began to take small steps toward healing. She reconnected with her church, started attending weekly yoga classes, and volunteered at the local animal shelter, a cause she and Michael had both supported. Slowly, the fog of grief began to lift. Emily learned the first secret to thriving after loss. Grief is natural, but it must not consume you forever. Healing takes time, but life can and will continue if you let it. Finding new purpose. For Emily, the next challenge was figuring out who she was without Michael. "We had been a unit for so long," she said, "that I forgot how to be just Emily." Rediscovering herself was both frightening and liberating. Emily returned to hobbies she had put aside: gardening, painting, and hiking. "I'd forgotten how much I loved being outside, feeling the dirt between my fingers," she said with a smile. "It was like I was reconnecting with parts of myself that had been buried for years." She also made new friends, mostly women from her church group who had gone through similar losses. "It was comforting to be around people who understood my pain," she explained. we could talk openly about our husbands, cry together, and laugh about the good times. It made me feel less alone. Emily's story is a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of finding new purpose after loss. While the pain of losing Michael will never fully go away, she has found ways to honor his memory while also embracing her future. "I know Michael is still with me," she said softly. "He's in my heart, in the flowers I plant, in the sunrises I watch every morning, and that gives me peace." Chapter 2. Independence in the Golden Years. Why it's more important than ever. Grace's story, balancing family and freedom. Grace Mitchell, 72, always thought she'd spend her later years traveling with her husband David. They had big plans, road trips across the country, visits to see their grandchildren, and maybe even a cruise or two. But all of that changed when David passed away unexpectedly after a heart attack. "I was in shock for months," Grace recalled. "We had just celebrated our 50th anniversary. One moment we were planning our next vacation, and the next I was planning his funeral." Her children, understandably concerned, insisted that she move in with them. At first, Grace resisted. She had always been independent, and the idea of giving up her home was heartbreaking. But her son Ryan was persistent. "He told me it was for the best," Grace said. "He didn't want me to be alone." Reluctantly, she agreed to move into Ryan's home, where he lived with his wife and 2 young children. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Grace helped around the house, babysat her grandchildren, and even enjoyed the hustle and bustle of a busy household. The burden of living with family. But soon, tensions began to rise. Grace found herself in the middle of disagreements between her son and his wife. "I tried to stay out of it, but it's hard when you're living under the same roof," she explained. "And then there were the little things, like how I raised my children differently than how they're raising theirs. I'd offer advice, but it wasn't always welcome." The final straw came when Ryan and his wife decided to stop giving Grace money for groceries, assuming her pension was enough. "I didn't mind helping out," she said, "but it felt like they were taking advantage of me. I started to feel more like a live-in nanny than a family member." Grace knew she couldn't live like that forever. "I loved my family, but I also knew I needed my own space. I wanted to enjoy my golden years, not feel like a burden or an outsider in my own son's home." Reclaiming independence. Grace made the difficult decision to move back into her own home. Her son was initially upset, but Grace stood her ground. "I told him I needed to live my life on my own terms," she said firmly. The first few weeks were tough. Grace missed her grandchildren, and the house felt unbearably quiet after the chaos of living with her family. But over time, she began to appreciate the peace and solitude. "I started doing things for myself again," she said. "I joined a painting class, reconnected with old friends, and even took a solo trip to the beach, a place David and I had always loved." Grace's story highlights the second secret to thriving after loss. Independence is key to living a fulfilling life, especially in later years. For Grace, reclaiming her independence wasn't just about moving out of her son's house. It was about rediscovering her identity and finding joy in her own company. "I realized that I didn't need to rely on anyone else for my happiness," she said. "I could create a life that was meaningful to me." The joy of solitude. One of the most surprising aspects of Grace's journey was how much she came to enjoy her own company. "I had always been a social person," she said, "but there's something incredibly peaceful about spending time alone." Grace started each day with a walk through her neighborhood, followed by a cup of tea on her porch. In the afternoons, she'd paint, read, or listen to music. "I learned to appreciate the quiet moments," she said. "There's a beauty in solitude that I hadn't noticed before." While Grace still spends time with her family, she now does so on her own terms. I visit my grandchildren, but I also make time for myself, she explained. It's about balance, loving your family while also loving yourself. Chapter 3. The Risks of Rushing into a New Relationship. Margaret's story, the complications of remarrying. Later in life. For some people, the idea of spending the rest of their lives alone is unbearable. That was the case for Margaret Jenkins, a 66-year-old widow who, after the death of her first husband, found herself longing for companionship. "I never thought I'd be one to remarry," Margaret admitted, "but after Bill passed, the loneliness became too much to bear." Margaret met Frank, a fellow widower, at a local senior centre. They hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared experiences of loss. "It was comforting to talk to someone who understood what I was going through," she said. "We started spending more and more time together, and before I knew it, we were dating." Rushing into a new relationship. Within a year of meeting, Frank proposed. Margaret was hesitant at first. Her children had warned her to take things slow, but the idea of having someone to share her life with again was too tempting to resist. "We got married in a small ceremony," Margaret said. "It felt right at the time. I thought we'd be able to support each other through the rest of our lives." But it didn't take long for problems to arise. "Frank and I were both set in our ways," she explained. "We had each been married for so long before, and we had our own routines. It was hard to adjust to living with someone new." One of the biggest challenges was blending their families. Frank's children were not as welcoming as Margaret had hoped, and there were frequent arguments about finances, household responsibilities, and even where they would spend the holidays. The strain of caregiving things became even more difficult when Frank's health began to decline. "I found myself in the role of caregiver," Margaret said. "It wasn't what I had signed up for. I thought we'd be partners, but instead I was taking care of him full-time." The stress of caregiving, combined with the tensions between their families, took a toll on their marriage. After just 3 years, Margaret made the difficult decision to file for divorce. "I felt guilty," she admitted. "I didn't want to abandon Frank, but I also knew I couldn't continue living like that. It wasn't healthy for either of us." The importance of taking time. Margaret's experience taught her the third secret to thriving after loss. Take your time before entering a new relationship, especially in later life. While companionship can be comforting, it's important to enter new relationships with caution, especially when blending families and dealing with the practical realities of aging. "I wish I had listened to my children," Margaret said. "They warned me to take things slow, but I was so eager to have someone in my life again that I didn't think things through. Now Margaret is content to live on her own. I've learned that I don't need a partner to be happy," she said. "I've built a life that's fulfilling on my own, and I'm proud of that." Embracing solitude. Once again. After her divorce, Margaret moved into a small cottage by the lake, a place where she could find peace and reflect on her life. "It's quiet here," she said, "and I've come to appreciate the simplicity of it all." She spends her days gardening, painting, and walking along the shore. "I'm learning to enjoy my own company again," she said. "I've realized that solitude doesn't have to be lonely. It can be a time of healing and self-discovery." Margaret's story is a reminder that while it's natural to seek companionship after the loss of a spouse, it's important to approach new relationships with care. "I rushed into things because I was afraid of being alone," she admitted. "But now I see that being alone can be a gift. It's given me the space to rediscover who I am and what I want from life." Conclusion: embracing life after loss. The stories of Emily, Grace, and Margaret show that while the loss of a spouse is one of the most painful experiences a person can go through, it is possible to find joy and meaning again. Each woman faced unique challenges, but they all learned important lessons about grief, independence, and self-discovery. Emily's journey taught us that grief is a natural part of life, but it must not consume us forever. By finding new purpose and reconnecting with her passions, Emily was able to honor her late husband's memory while embracing her future. Grace's story highlighted the importance of independence, especially in later years. By reclaiming her own space and rediscovering her identity, Grace found joy in solitude and learned to love her own company. Margaret's experience showed us the risks of rushing into a new relationship after loss. While companionship can be comforting, it's important to take time to heal and reflect before entering into a new partnership. For those who have lost a spouse, the path to healing may be long and difficult, but it is not impossible. By embracing these 3 secrets, allowing yourself to grieve, maintaining your independence, and taking time before making major life decisions, you can find a way to thrive after loss. Life after the loss of a spouse will never be the same, but it can still be beautiful, meaningful, and full of joy. You have the strength within you to rebuild, to rediscover yourself, and to live a life that honors both your past and your future. Thank you for watching our video. If you found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel, ZOZO Wisdom. Be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future videos packed with valuable insights and wisdom.